Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about how to preserve foods. In the first video we talked about canning foods to preserve them. Well, today we're going to can a pork tenderloin. First step in that is to trim the fat off of those. So that's what I'm going to work on right now. Also, before I did that, I kind of prepped things so you wouldn't be bored. I took 2 medium-sized onions and I simply sliced them up to where I have slices. That's going to be in the bottom of my jar, just for flavoring, and we'll add a little salt and pepper to that. This is just a quick tutorial on how to pressure can meats. I told you you could preserve meats. You can do beef, chicken, pork, deer, any type of meat you can preserve this way. One thing to remember, when I go to season this meat, it's going to be just small amounts of seasoning. The longer that seasoning sets in that jar, the more that meat's going to absorb those flavors, and you don't want to overpower the flavors. I learned that with my first jars of hamburger meat that I did. Added too much salt. Didn't have to salt anything when I used the meat for a recipe. So remember that. We'll probably put like a half a teaspoon of canning salt in these jars, along with just a little bit of layer of onions on the bottom. This whole pork loin that we have here, it's kind of hard to see with the lights on. Let's see if that helps. A little bit. I found this on sale at Sam's. It was $18 for this. One good way to do this is you find a meat that you want on sale, or you find any type of meat on sale, anything that you're gonna eat. Pick that thing up. If you can find, right now it's hard to do, but if you can find a pressure canner, mason jars, lids, and rings, then you're set up. But right now all that stuff's hard to find because of the pandemic. So if you start looking now and you think this might be something you're interested in, start searching now. Try and find you a pressure canner. Lots of different brands out there. Mine's a pretty simple one. They have them with pressure gauges, different types of weights. When we get to that point, I'll go over it a little more. So one thing to remember, always inspect your jars, your lids, and rings for any type of damage to the seals or the top of the glass on top. Just because if it's not, you're going to get botulism in there because it's not sealed off. The bacteria is going to get in, and that's going to be your problem there. So the main thing, always inspect your glass, your lids, and your rings before you install them. So to keep from boring you, I'm going to maybe do a time lapse on this. I'm going to trim that pork. One thing about trimming that, you want to get as much of that white fat off of the top of those as possible. The more of that you can get off, the prettier it's going to be in the jar. When you pressure can pork, I'm going to cold pack this. So what that means, I'm going to just dice it up raw, put it into the jars, and let the pressure canner cook this meat. You can hot pack it, which means you basically go in, you cook your meat before you put it in. That will eliminate any fat that you'll see on the top or on the sides of your meat in the jars for a prettier canning process. Me personally, I would rather just take this, trim it up, let the pressure canner cook it. And I will say that we have done this before with a pork loin, and when we pulled it out, we used it for green chili stew. Some of the most tender pork loin we've ever had good flavor to it, and we really enjoyed it. So right now I'm going to go ahead and pause this. Like I said, I may do a time lapse just to show you trimming the pork loin. That way it doesn't take as long. Okay, so we have all of our meat trimmed and diced. I tried to dice them just roughly around a 1-inch cube. Squared it out the best I could. Doesn't have to be exact. And while I was doing that, I have my mason jars in my pressure canner steaming just to sterilize them. I also have another pan back here with my lids and my rings in it and I'll bring that to a boil, and we're going to sanitize those as well. So now that I have the jars in boiling water, we're going to pull those out. This is a handy little tool. You can get it at Walmart. It's for picking up mason jars. Also, you can order these right here. Little spatula, has measurements for your headspace on there. I don't know if you can see them in the, yeah you can, a little bit. A lot of your recipes will call for 1 inch of headspace. This is a magnet to pull your rings and your lids out of boiling water. So, very useful tools. So now we're going to take, one thing to remember, you never want to take your mason jar, set it onto a cold surface after you've had it sanitizing or in boiling water. They will bust. I have them upside down, so it's going to be a little tough to get them out. It might be a little loud. I turn them upside down so the steam could get inside, just to sanitize that inside of those jars. I'm sure there's people out there that have better ways of doing this. This is just the way I've done it. It's worked for me. So that's the way we're going to continue to do it. These are hard to get out when they're upside down like this. This tool is actually designed to grab the tops of these jars. They are hot, by the way, but I don't want to drop them. So, okay, we've got our jars out. I've turned my lids and rings way down. They were boiling pretty good. Okay, I have a funnel that I've sterilized in boiling water as well. I'm going to take that funnel, I'm going to set it in a jar, and all I'm going to do, I'm going to get my onions, and I'm just going to put a thin layer of just sliced onions in the bottom, just for flavor. And when you seen this, you probably thought, man, that's a lot of pork. There's no way he's going to have enough jars for that. You would be surprised. First time I did this, I had a pork loin, and I did probably a dozen jars so that I would have enough jars. Maybe even a little more. I may have done like 12 to 15. I don't know. Thinking that I was going to use them all, I ended up using 6 quart jars. These are wide mouth jars. One thing to remember, when you get ready to pull this meat out, you basically boiled it, shrinked your meat way down. It's going to be pretty much packed in there. Wide mouth jars is what I prefer on this type of stuff, just because it's easier to get out. You don't want to have to sit there and dig in your normal jars trying to get the meat out with a fork or a knife or whatever. This is just a quick, easy way to add a little ease to the whole process. So, I may not use all of these jars, but I always add a couple of extra just in case. That way I don't have to worry if I haven't had enough jars, going back, getting more jars out, washing them, sanitizing them, getting them all cleaned and ready while I'm in the middle of this process. So I always try and do enough to where I can pack all the meat in there, and maybe even if I have an extra jar, it doesn't matter. Still have the onions in all of them ready to go. I can always take those onions, dump them out, use them in something else. It's a clean jar, not worried about it. So there's all the onions in the bottom. We got that done. Now we're going to pack the meat down into these jars. Key to remember on that, that little spatula I showed you, we're going to use that. We're going to add just a tiny amount of water to this because your pork's going to produce its own broth. So if we add too much water, we're going to overflow. You're not going to get a good seal on your rings. So we'll start putting the meat in. We just drop these cubes in there on top of those onions, and you're going to be surprised that whole pork loin, how few of jars it actually is going to take. Once we get these full, I'll show you. We're going to take just a clean cloth towel, and we're going to wipe the lids down with vinegar. That's just going to get any fat or anything that might have been on top of these off that ring, so we can seal real good. Okay, your 1-inch headspace that I was talking about, if you see the mason jar, you're going to have a lip around that mason jar. Let me bring it over there. You're going to have that lip around the bottom of your mason jar. Normally that's a 1-inch headspace right there. You want to at least leave that open. 99% of your recipes are going to call for 1-inch headspace. Prevents boil over while you're canning. And like I said, you're not going to get a good seal if you have a boil over. So, I know I'm not looking at the camera a lot right now, forgive me for that, but I know everybody that does YouTube channels is probably going, man, you got to look at the camera. Well, that's the way it is right now. So, when you pack these in there, go ahead and pack that meat down pretty tight. Like I said, it is, when you add heat to any type of meat, you're going to constrict that muscle, and it is going to shrink down on you. So you're going to end up with a lot less in there than what you think by the time it's all said and done. But you will still have some very good tender meat, I promise you. Like I said, we didn't think it was going to be impressive when we looked at it because of the cold packing. It just turns the meat white. I tried to trim off as much fat as I can. Pork's already a fatty meat, and the reason I trim that off is for appearance in the jar. You will have a pretty rough appearance, and it's nothing that's going to affect the flavoring. If anything, it'll probably help the flavor, having that fat in there. But that fat does boil, and if you've ever boiled meat with fat in it, it looks like it's stringy. It makes a glaze of fat on top of the meat, and just less appealing to the eyes. So we're going to get all these jars full, and once we get those full, we're going to take and put the lids on those after we clean the ring. First, we'll add about a half a teaspoon of salt, and about the same with pepper, probably about a half a teaspoon of pepper as well. So, once you pull that funnel, I always add a couple more pieces just to get it up to that ring, because I do know it's going to shrink down and I'll have plenty of headspace. So I take it, I pack it in there pretty good. So there we are, we're at 3 quarts of pork loin. We'll probably get about 5 quarts out of this. So like I said, I overestimated, but that's okay on my jars. It's better to have enough jars or too many jars than not enough, for the simple fact of how much time it takes washing your jars, prepping your jars, getting them ready, just so that you can put meat in these. So yeah, we'll be lucky if we fill up 5 quarts out of a whole pork loin. Let's see. Yeah, so we're gonna have 3 really full jars of pork loin and 2 that are not near as full. They're probably 2/3 to 3/4 of the way full. So got that done. We're gonna add about a half a teaspoon, between a quarter and a half a teaspoon of canning salt to each one of these. Remember, like I said, as it sets, your flavors just get stronger. So about the same with pepper. The onion, salt, and peppers just for flavor. Doesn't doesn't help preserve really. Canning salt, you can get it at pretty much any store. It's a canning and pickling salt, all natural. So, all right, we got that in there. The rest of the onions, I'm just gonna take and I'm gonna add those on top of my jars that were a little short of pork. So we've got that done. We've got them ready to go. Okay, so I've dropped the camera down. I just want to get a good view of this and show you what I'm doing. I have some white distilled vinegar, paper towel. It's clean. I'm just going to dab this with the vinegar. And I'm going to take and I'm going to wipe each one of these surfaces on top of that jar, just to make sure that I don't have any of the fats or salt or anything on top. That just helps clean those off. Now I'm going to take my magnet and I'm going to pull out rings and lids for enough to cover all these jars. Trust me, they've been boiling in water. You don't want to reach in there with your hand. Try not to touch the surface of your seal in there. And like I said, always inspect those. We're just going to take that, we're going to set it on top. We're going to do that to each one. One thing I did forget to do was add just a little bit of liquid to that. Let's get us a measuring cup. We're just going to add a little bit of water to each one. That water is going to sit on top. That's where that little spatula comes in. We're just going to push it down. Make sure that that water hits the bottom of those jars. Try not to have air bubbles in it. That meat's packed in there pretty good on some of those jars. So when I do this, it just sits on top because that meat has created a seal inside there. So now we'll take this little rubber spatula. We'll just run down the side, try and get the air bubbles out. You can see it bubbling as it runs down in between that meat. Be careful at this point not to touch the tops of your jars. You don't want any of that water with the grease and fat hitting that surface of that lid, where that lid's going to sit. So all that water that was sitting on top, this right here just helps take it to the bottom. And like I said, this pork's going to create its own broth as it cooks. So one thing about pressure canning, read your owner's manual. It'll tell you one thing you need to know is your elevation. Where your elevation is, that'll let you know how many pounds of pressure that you're going to need to cook at to kill any bacteria that might be in there. So I put that lid on just hand tight. I take one finger, one thumb, just tighten it up a little bit. Doesn't have to be locked down super tight. You do want air to be able to escape out of that. As you increase the pressure inside that jar, it's going to build up air in there trying to escape. That's what causes your jars to seal. So, got our meat in here. We're going to start setting these in the canner, in the pressure cooker. As you can see, that one may be a little full, hopefully not. We're about half a jar of liquid on that one. I try not to get very much liquid in those just because I have had them boil over. If they boil over, most of the time they don't seal, which if that doesn't seal, not a big deal. Use it for a meal within a week. You know, that's what we do. If it doesn't seal off, we just plan a meal around that. So we'd make like our green chili pork stew or something with it. Something that the meat's already cooked. All you have to do is go in there, open up the jar, add your ingredients, and basically just heat it up. That's all there is to that. So all of our jars are in the pressure canner. Like I said, not tightening them up tight, just want to snug them down a little bit. I'm just kind of going back, checking them all. A little tight. Okay, so now we're going to kick the heat up on this. We want this at a boil. And we're going to take this here lid. These line up one certain way. So we're going to take that, lock it in place. One thing to remember, always check your seal underneath that. If you don't check it, then you're not going to get the pressure that you need. And when you don't have the pressure you need, you're not going to get a good seal, and you're not going to kill all the bacteria that's in there that possibly could cause botulism or lead to botulism. So at this point, we're going to wait for it to start letting off some steam off this vent right here in the center. And I'll wait about 10 to 15 minutes, let that steam come out, pushes any air out that was in there that hadn't been sterilized from the steam, and then we'll put our weight on it. Okay, so my lid lock has popped up. My lid's locked down. My overpressure button has locked into place. And we've vented for about 12 and a half to 15 minutes now. So now I'm going to take my weight and I'm going to place it on here. Be careful, that steam coming out, you don't want to burn yourself. Now once we get this weight to where it's rocking, not vigorously, but at a steady pace, just you'll hear it just clack, 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 clack. That's about where you want it. You don't want it sitting there just rattling off the walls. Once we get to that point, we're going to pressure cook these jars for 90 minutes because they're raw meat in there. Your pressure canner will have the instructions for cold packing or hot packing meat. So we did the cold pack method, means raw meat in the jar, and we're going to take that, we're going to pressure cook it for 90 minutes. And when that's done, I'll be back and we're going to take these out. And one thing I did forget to mention that I did on here, for your water, just to keep your jars from getting that white sediment color on top of them, I added about a teaspoon of distilled white vinegar to my water. About a tablespoon of distilled white vinegar to my water. That just keeps your water clear, keeps that sediment from sticking to your jars. So once this starts rattling, we'll go 90 minutes, and I'll show you the rattle that we're looking for here in a minute when it gets going. That'll take about 15 minutes before that fires off. And a lot of people may think, okay, well, why are you doing this when you can just go buy your produce at the store? Well, what we've seen during the pandemic is people panic and they buy everything that they can all at once, and that leaves nothing for you. So you also think, well, why don't I just buy my own canned goods and stick them on my shelf? Well, that's great if they have it in the grocery store. The best idea, or the best way I have to explain this, is why not be prepared? If you have a garden, you can can your green beans, your carrots, whatever you eat. And when we talk about that, make sure that you look for something that you and your family will eat if you're going to plant a garden. If you're not going to eat it, don't plant it. You're wasting your time. Once you get those, people think, well, I got to eat all these right now because they're going to go bad. Well, this is a way to save your food and preserve your food. Just like your canned green beans, your canned carrots, your canned corn, whatever you grow that you want to save that your family will eat, you can do this either in a pressure cooker or a water bath. Your acid levels have to be high enough to use a water bath to preserve that food to keep it from getting botulism in it. So in saying that, meat does not have enough acid in it to preserve by just water bath canning. And water bath canning is basically you just set jars in boiling water and you let them boil until they get hot all the way through and they seal off. You boil at 212 degrees. So at that point, that's heated your jar high enough to kill anything that can survive at that acid level. So with pressure canning, you actually raise your boiling temperature up higher because you're boiling in pressure, which means your boiling temperature is way higher in that. And by doing that, you're going to kill any possibility of botulism or any bacteria that may start growing in that jar that can make you sick or even kill you. So I know nobody out there wants to die just because they was trying to preserve food. So always read your instructions, do some research before you start canning, and that way you can provide for your family and you can keep yourself safe by doing that, and you'll have a supply of food. This doesn't all have to happen overnight. Like I said, we bought the pork loin for 18 bucks, had it in our freezer for a while, didn't want to smoke it, didn't want to do anything with it right now, so I decided we'll just put it in jars, we'll can it. Simple method to have food on my shelves for my family, and set you up a small pantry. It doesn't have to be big. If you got enough meat in there and vegetables for a month, great. That's a month that you don't have to worry about. Some people go way further than that and they'll have a year's supply of food. Buy you some dried goods, noodles, beans, stuff like that, rice that's shelf stable, that will last for a while. And always remember to cycle through those things as your expiration date comes up. You're not going to want to keep those things on your shelf forever because they're not good for forever. But with this meat right here, instead of setting it in my freezer for 2 years and never using it, I can put it in these jars. It's ready to go. All we have to do is pull it off of the shelf, throw it in a pan, heat it up. We're good to go. That's a 90% of your meal prepared, because your meat usually takes the longest to cook. So remember that for people who work, 9 to 5, 8 to 5, whatever you work, if you can do this and you want to come home and have a good meal, then the longest part of your meal is prepared. You're ready to go. So this is just a way to save time and a way to save money in the long run and provide for your family and have that self-comfort of, okay, I'm not worried the stores are out of food, but I have food on my shelves. So once this starts rocking and rolling, I will come back. I'll show you what we're looking for on the weight, how it rattles, and we'll go from there. So I told you I'd come back and I'd show you what we're looking for on that weight rattling. This is about what you want, right around in here. It's not going crazy, but it's a steady roll. So now we're gonna set our timer for 90 minutes, and we're gonna let that set and cook for 90 minutes until that's done. So once that's done, we'll come back and we will let that cool off. One thing to remember, you never pull your jars out when that is still rattling. You want that shut off right here that I was talking about, your can lock right there. You want that to drop on its own. You never want to stop that early and try and open that lid. If you do, all your pressure inside those jars is going to release because you've taken all the pressure off that lid, and you're going to have overflow out of your jars and they're not going to seal. So one thing to remember, wait and let it cool off on its own. Once those cool off, we'll be back, we'll pull them out. I'll show you what it looks like and what we have at the end. Okay, so our temperature has finally dropped to where our lock has dropped on our pressure cooker. So we'll remove the weight, set it off to the side. We're going to open the lid. Ensure that no steam's coming out of this when you open the top. Now that we've done that, we're going to pull that off to the side. Going to use our tool. We're going to grab these and we're going to pull them out. Oh, we had a jar that busted, so that one gets to stay. Bottom fell out of it. I will show you all a video of that, or I'll show that on the video here in a minute. So once we get them all out, craziest thing about this is that it will set and it will boil for a while after this. So let me show you all the jar that busted. That jar right there, the bottom busted out of it. So sometimes that happens. I'm not gonna pull it out right now, We'll see if I can save that meat. If I can save that meat, then we'll use it in something tonight. Not a big deal. It is cooked. It's good to go. So we'll use that. We will come up with something tonight, whether it's pork fajitas, nachos, something like that, and we'll go from there. But once we've done that, our main goal now is to set and wait for all these lids on the remaining 4 to seal off. So I don't know if you can see it. Let me see if I can get this. These things will boil for probably another hour or so, and you'll hear them start to pop. When they start to pop, they're sealing off. That's a good thing. That's what you're looking for. And at that point, once they've sealed off, I always take my rings off of these bottles, or off of these jars, just to ensure. The good thing about that, you pull those rings off, you know that if you break a seal, the lid on there will pop up. And so once they seal off, I try and take some time, give them a week or two, and always test your tops. If your tops are not sucked down, they're not sealed off, then I would probably throw them away. So as far as canning meat, that's my video for today. If you have any questions, leave a comment. Make sure that you like and share our video and subscribe. Thank you very much. Bye. So one thing I said was we may use this meat with the busted jar for a meal tonight. I'm not going to, for the simple fact that there are busted pieces of glass down in the bottom of our pressure cooker. And so for that reason, I'm gonna throw that out. Just a reminder, it's always better to throw that out if you're not gonna use it, if there's a danger of someone being injured or eating glass. So we're gonna throw that one out. I was hoping that just the bottom of the jar just popped loose, but there is glass in the bottom of the pressure cooker. So I'm gonna get rid of that. I'm not gonna use it. And sorry that I had to add this at the end of the video. Always, it's better to err on the side of caution than to worry about wasting a small amount of meat than there is of injuring your family. So remember that, be careful, and hopefully this video was informative, and y'all have a good day. Thanks.